Hi there, everybody. My name is Chris Metzen. I'm the Vice President of Creative Development for Blizzard and the lead world designer for the series for the past, 9 years or so, or ever since Warcraft 2. Wanted to talk a bit today about kind of the story of Warcraft and how the world unfolded, specifically from the series RTS roots and up through the creation and development of certainly World of Warcraft, and also kind of how it's translated to the D&D game series that we've been creating with White Wolf Publishing, some of the novels we've had a chance to put out. Warcraft's become kind of a big fantasy juggernaut, strangely enough, after all these years, and it's kind of interesting how it has unfolded. Essentially Warcraft is, if you figure that most modern fantasy is kind of based off of, Lord of the Rings or, Tolkien's work, he kind of had amalgamated a lot of fantasy ideas, elves and magic weapons and wizards and huge epic scope histories, weaving together. Warcraft's essentially kind of third or fourth generation fantasy, which is kind of crazy these days, where you have kind of a lot of video game fantasy universes becoming the new school kind of settings. You have a lot of interactive games kind of taking place in these worlds that are, essentially phantoms of Tolkien's vision back in the day. Warcraft's certainly part of that tradition, elves and dwarves and dragons and such. One of the things we always thought was a good idea is holding on to the more traditional fantasy archetypes, because that's what most people kind of glom onto. It's that familiarity of dwarves and elves and magic rings and things that kind of define what fantasy is. We found that, people like that. People are really drawn to that. It's a strength of the genre, whether in video games or just, fiction. If you're reading a novel, it's the familiarity that really sings to people over and over. But we've always liked the idea of kind of spinning those archetypes on their head. What happens when elves go crazy as a race? What happens when dark elves suddenly are heroic and noble? What happens when orcs, that are typically, mindless and brutal? What happens when they're kind of given some nobility? And we can kind of begin to identify with these races and cultures kind of beyond that surface kit that we've been sold all these years through various products and media. So it's been pretty crazy kind of developing the World of Warcraft and trying to change it up a bit, keep it familiar enough to people who are interested in fantasy, but kind of shake it up and drive it boldly forward to those who kind of want a little more out of their gaming experience, which is, certainly our core role. It's kind of been a strange process, developing the kind of geography of the World of Warcraft as the storyline is unfolded. When you're developing RTS games, there really isn't a hard parameter on how the world unfolds, right? You just kind of need maps to make up and, kingdoms to destroy. It's a very planar design. You just kind of draw 2D on a page, what a landmass that looks interesting and try and dot it with interesting stuff. I imagine a lot of RTS games are kind of designed that way, just kind of in a very planar sense. It started to get interesting, when we started talking about World of Warcraft and expanding this place and these locales to be more 3D, to be more, immersive, places that you'd actually run around in, instead of just being RTS maps and very planar. How does it begin to translate to an immersive world experience? It was kind of weird, shifting gears from the RTS mindset to the RPG mindset. We kind of always knew, since Warcraft 2, we always knew that, as we expanded, in Warcraft 1, we had, the kingdom of Stormwind and the land of Azeroth. And it was the conflict of that game was pretty much contained within that place. The orcs come through the swamps of Sorrow and, through Elwyn Forest and attack Stormwind. The scope of that conflict was pretty small. As we started talking about Warcraft 2 and the idea of expanding the two armies, certainly we had the orcs and the humans at that point. With Warcraft 2, we wanted to expand more races into those groups, so the human group became the alliance, with elves and dwarves and gnomes. Reciprocally, the orc group expanded to include forest trolls and ogres and death knights and all sorts of good creepy guys. But in doing so, for our world context, we wanted to show where these creatures came from, and have a greater sense of ecology and a greater sense of world. So it became necessary to create, Cosmodon, or, the area the dwarves came from, or Lordaeron, and ultimately Quel'Thalas, where the secondary human kingdoms and elves came from specifically. So a lot of the design decisions with the two armies and kind of expanding them predicated building the world and building it out further. As Warcraft 2 completed, and we created Draenor for the Warcraft 2 expansion set, Draenor being the place where the orcs came from, it became clear that in the core world of Azeroth we would need more continents, and wouldn't it be interesting to imagine more ancient realms that had never heard of orcs and humans, where this conflict might spill over, and thus drudge up kind of new mysteries and a new mythological cycle for the setting. Thus, we had been talking about creating Kalimdor, this ancient land of the Night Elves. We kind of really warmed to the idea quickly of Dark Elves in this context being the good guys and being kind of the eldest race, the keepers of ancient mystery. So it was kind of interesting to talk about Kalimdor and these dark primordial forest lands and the barrens in the middle, lands that were once lush but kind of destroyed by some kind of apocalypse. It was interesting to imagine Kalimdor having been affected by some huge explosion. Again, it's probably a fantasy archetype, to have your world shattered in some great way. I mean, I've seen it in 100 different stories and 100 different themes. But that got us thinking, game design-wise, we were in more recent years talking about, well, Warcraft 3, let's talk about what that would be. Are we still just talking two armies? Are we talking expanding that? In our conversations, certainly we wound up with the undead and night elves, but at one point we were definitely considering the Burning Legion to be a race. And a lot of our discussions about the Burning Legion stemmed from, that demons are cool and would have been a neat army set, but kind of from, the story context of the night elves and Kalimdor and their shattered land. And was there more backstory with them and the demons, and was there a greater conflict in the world that kind of predicated the story that we were seeing unfold in the games that we had published up to that point, War 1, War 2, and we definitely wanted War 3 to kind of encompass all these elements, the Night Elves reawakening, visiting Kalimdor. We wanted the newer races like orcs and humans to kind of be thrown into this ancient conflict and see this ancient land and really have the events of the past kind of come full circle with the resolution of that game. So a lot of times it's the game design and the kind of loose story threads that wind up predicating, what we build, and the game experience that we tailor to it. There's always been a drive that we have had to build a lot of detail into our world and build a lot of backstory into our settings. Specifically, when creating strategy games, it's just difficult to tell a story in that context. You're commanding units and it's real time, and the battlefields, often look very similar. It's hard to get a sense of context or, a sense of story progression. The theory was that, if you have a rich backstory and you have it play out to any degree in the RTS context, that it helps to be immersive and it helps players to kind of get your world and, get this setting, and it makes it special. It makes it stand out against the pack. And we've seen many, many RTS games over the years. And, one of the things that potentially made Warcraft stand out past the gameplay was just the character of the setting and the fact that it was kind of deep, and had and just had a lot of stuff going on, a lot of characters, a lot of intrigue, a lot of history. It kind of gives it its own identity, really. So as we looked to translating all of that to World of Warcraft specifically, it was a little daunting, but it was a great deal of fun. Looking back on the world we had built up to that point. So it was a really cool process of kind of extrapolating, from maps in 8-year-old game manuals and trying to kind of draw them out and really flesh these lands out and these histories out and these cultures. Proved to be a pretty big task, but a fun one. At this point in time, as we're looking at the home stretch on our shipping product for a while, it's crazy how this world has gone from, kind of this very thin idea, thin wallpapering on an RTS series, and it's really blown into just this juggernaut of context and flavor and atmosphere that's defined by 40 artists and programmers and really creative designers. There's just so many heads involved in this thing and kind of creating the vision of this in the world. It's really been crazy to kind of watch this thing grow, kind of take on its own life. It's, at the end of the day, of course I'm very biased, but it's just a cool world. Who would have thought 9 years ago, Warcraft 1, that it would have rolled this way, attributed to certainly game design and a lot of passion, a lot of commitment, a lot of hard work. But it's very rewarding to have seen this world, come off the way it has and to have been a part of how it's kind of been shaped. When we're talking about making, massively multiplayer game, certainly game design comes first, and we wanted the classes to be fun and, have it be a place that you would just have a blast exploring and leveling up and doing, whatever you do in an RPG. But the trick to WoW is that we identified early on is that we wanted to have the quest content be kind of a staple of your experience, and to throw as much story and context at you as possible. Maybe not to the point where you're being drowned in context and, well, I don't remember who this guy is, or, sometimes it can be distracting, the story content, but we wanted enough there that it really felt like you were in an authentic fantasy setting, and that the things you did mattered overall, that you'd be able to meet characters and NPCs from past games, or, like notable characters from history, guys like Thrall and Jaina Proudmoore, and, villains like Kel'Thuzad and the Lich King, things like that, so that you'd really get a sense that, we were taking the process of building a world seriously, and it wasn't just churned out, and that it had a strong sense of continuity. And we've always tried to do that with our ancillary products, like the D&D line and our novels. We're kind of painstakingly anal about making sure that all the details add up, that the continuity is, held to be sacred, so that no matter in what medium you're experiencing Warcraft, it all feels like a contiguous experience. Hope you really enjoy WoW. Hope that, some of this story and history comes off and that we've done our job well and you feel like you're a part of it. Better yet, you feel like, you're at the heart of it, would even be better. So once again, thanks for listening and have a good one. Bye-bye.